Well, welcome to the second of the Anthropocene Histories seminars this term, Holistic Ecologies before Modernity. Um, this seemed like a really important topic and a very sort of large and present topic to engage with. The whole idea of the Anthropocene, in a sense, is about there being some sort of planetary ecology. The whole idea of Earth science is predicated on seeing the planet as a whole, and this has obviously been something that historians have grappled with for some time, including some of the very large kind of figures in this field. Someone like Bruno Latour obviously thought about the whole idea of Gaia in his book Facing Gaia, en face de Gaia. And just this week, I noticed Suzanne Simard, who may come up in conversation, I'm not sure, the Canadian botanist and forest specialist, has another book out talking about the sort of sentience of forests, wider ecologies, if you like. So we're delighted to have two wonderful scholars here to talk and think about this in the pre-modern period. So if Gaia is something that's was obviously coined by Lynn Margulis and James Lovelock as a way of thinking about sort of planetary holistic ecology in a very contemporary way, but it was obviously using that figure of Gaia, the ancient Greek goddess, as a way to do that. So we're very much thinking today about pre-modern holistic ecologies. I'll introduce both our speakers, and then Minji will go first, followed by François. We will reserve, if I can, questions for the later discussion. Minji Lee is an assistant professor in religion and medical humanities program at Montclair State University. She specializes in the study of medicine in relation to cultural practice and belief systems, including women's health, reproductive issues, and comparative approaches to medicine in Korea and the West. She's the author of The Medieval Womb, Hildegard of Bingen's Views on the Female Reproductive Body, which came out last year with Arc Humanities Press, and she will talk about Hildegard primarily in this context. Dr. François Quiviger is an associate at the Berg Institute and the general editor of Reaction's wonderful Renaissance Lives series. He's published widely on art history and the history of cognition and sensation. Leonardo da Vinci, Self, Art and Nature came out in 2019, and Bernard Palissy and The Arts of the Earth came out last year, both in that Renaissance Lives series. And François will talk primarily in the first instance about Palissy and his work. So we'll go in that order, sort of chronologically, if you like. So Minji, you the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Sabapathy, for the introduction. So let me share my screen. And if you cannot see, please let me know. Okay, I will start. It is my great honor to join this workshop on holistic ecologies before modernity. Today's talk is titled Hildegard's Ecological View, Human Beings Connected to Universe. I'm originally very familiar with the women's medicine and how the female reproductive and sexual body was represented, not only in Hildegard, but also in medieval church and the medicine. However, for the purposes of today's topic, I have shifted toward the more general question of how human beings are connected through the body and the mind, and also good deeds, while still maintaining a focus on the woman's perspective. So today's topic is organized as follows. After the introduction, I will move to the body part and start with the microcosm and the macrocosm, examining how the human body, mind, and spirit are closely connected to the whole universe as God's creation. I then moved to woman's part, how woman is seen as more porous and therefore more directly communicating with the nature, especially in terms of womanly symptoms. I will then suggest some treatment according to Hildegard that draws on the communication with nature. Hildegard believes that the human beings fall sick when they lose the balance within their bodies, but that this balance can be restored by communicating with the nature because nature contains everything we need. I will then move to the conclusion. By way of a brief introduction, Hildegard was a German nun, mainly active in the 12th century and part of the Benedictine order. She began her religious life very early, when she was 8 or 9 years old. She was a visionary abbess and a writer. She became a doctor of the church when she canonized in 2012. There's only 4 women doctor of the church, so this is kind of remarkable, and it shows that actually the church recognized her scholastic contribution. She established 2 monasteries for nuns, which is remarkable. The second one in particular was independent, not part of the double monastery, and not guided by the monks or the male priests. So she faced several criticism for this. But despite the difficulties, she proceeded in founding and running the monastery. She composed many books, delivered numerous sermons, and wrote extensive correspondence. She was a powerful figure not only in the church but also in politics, and she was not shy about expressing strong opinions, sometimes reproving wars and abuse of power. So here I have a list of her books, but among them, I will focus on her medical book, Cause Cure, or in English, Causes and Cures. This book is a medical manuscript, and that contains so much diagnosis and resulting conditions and treatment for various audience. And she believes that in order to cure someone's disease or some symptoms, it is very important to understand how human beings were created, how they were degenerated from the original sin. So in this book, she's going back all the way back to God's creation. So she shows the divine creation and the original sin and the spiritual physical fall of the humankind and all the resulting issues in reproduction and the various illness. And she covers various a wide range of conditions from minor illness such as drunkenness or migraine to severe disease such as cancer and even the death. And she shared very optimistic views that humankind have restorative power to heal themselves because they were created by God. They were once perfect in God's creation. So if we do our effort to going back to that balanced state, then we can become healthier in terms of the body and the mind and the spirit all together. And in this presentation, I'm using the Priscilla Sroop's English version of the Cause Cure. And also, I want to mention my recent book published by Arc Humanities, supported by the College of Humanities and Social Science by my university. It is open access, so if you are interested in how Hildegard engaged with the woman's body specifically, I invite you to read it. If you scan this QR code, or you can just Google it, and then you can get the open access copy of my book. Now, microcosm and macrocosm. Hildegard adopts the understanding that God created everything, and she draws on the biblical description of how human beings were created by God, formed from the earth with his spirit breathed into them. She then adopts this account as so as to align it with the prevailing contemporary medical theory and natural philosophy. Namely, the human beings are composed of four different elements and therefore of four humors or the bodily liquids. So let us consider how that model works. So here I have the English version, heavily depending on the Priscilla Surup's English translation, and then I accompanied by the Latin critical version too. So in her book too, after she explaining about the creation of the whole world, and then she moved to the creation of Adam. So here, I'm gonna read the passage. When God created man, it was mud stuck together with water from which the human beings were formed. God sent into that form a fiery and airy breath of life. Man was formed from the fire of the breath of life and from the air, that life breath, the water which stuck the mud together become blood. So here you can find the four elements involved in like Adam's creation. So of course she's depending on the bibliographical description of Adam's creation, but definitely she add to the Galenic the four elements and four temperaments and four humors, which becomes the bodily essential liquid in one's body. Then she moved to the creation of Eve. And as we all know that if we are familiar with the Christian tradition, Eve was created by from Adam's flesh. And Eve, because she was created in different way, she's more soft and more airy, and she has keen mind and a pleasant life because she was not directly created from the earth. But still, Eve contains four elements originated from the Adam's body, so still she has the four elements in herself. And for her, the four elements was kind of composed not only the whole universe but into the human body. And at first, she was like those four elements and also the four humors in the human bodies were perfectly balanced. So human beings, they are not dying. They're gonna live forever, healthier, they're happier. But this is gonna be soon to be corrupted. But let me hold that for a moment because the God's creation moment is also repeated in the human beings reproduction. So for Hildegard, when she's explaining about the embryology or reproduction, she described how a fetus is conceived as a kind of repetition of the original creation. In her view, this is a smaller version of the first egg of God. So she discussed the female reproduction contribution to conception. She actually did not believe that the female, they had the seed, but still women contribute to the production by providing the form. Sometimes she mentions about the menstrual blood following the medieval medical tradition. And once the woman's reproductive form joins with the male partner's semen, actually the four elements in woman's body, they surround this this combination of the floods, and then they warm it and they just kindled it and it just dry it, and the water also gives the pure dampness, and the earth also gives a membrane and it's kind of giving the form. So these four elements in the woman's body also used to create a new life, which also, of course, reminds you of the God's creation. So the human beings, the conception and reproduction is the repetition of the God's creation in a smaller version. But as we all know, human beings transgress. They committed original sin and their bodies degenerated. The elements were once perfectly balanced, became injurious, and humanity began to die and to grow sick. But it is not only the body that changed, the mind changed too. Before the transgression, Adam was not inclining to sinful thought. He has the perfect knowledge. He could see the future. But once he committed the first sin, his mind is also transformed. So the human beings, their knowledge is limited and they're more inclined to the sinful act. So that make whole the problems. And it was not only human beings who were affected. The whole world was impacted by this transgression. The firmament, which in medieval cosmology was a distinct layer of the sky, had been still and stable before the transgression. Once Adam committed the original sin, it began to move, to revolve and transform. And after the last judgment, Hildegard is optimistic. It will stand immobile once again, but for now it must keep moving or it will be lost. So here you can see that the firmament started to move, and now once it started to move, they have to keep moving because otherwise it's gonna be flow away, having become liquid. And this in revolvement, actually, it is the process of the cleaning the elements because the world is not perfect any longer. They have to move so that they can cleanse some of the elements out of it. And I'm gonna coming back to this purgation and the cleanse. And also other parts of the whole universe is changed. The water was not speedy before Adam's transgression, but now it became speedy and unstable, and sometimes it can make the flood, so it become the violent. And the earth, it was once dry and brittle, not transfused with water, but it became muddy and slimy after Adam's transgression. Wild beasts, they were not rough. They love human beings. Human beings love wild beasts. But once the Adam transgressed, they became rough. And the human beings and they are frightened by each other and sometimes killing one another. And this codependence continues even after the Adam's transgression. So here she continues that the world is still affected by the human in terms of their deeds. So in this passage, she is saying that if the person is kind of making the mess of the world, like mess of the world, if they bring the hatreds or the battles and then envy, terror, actually it impacts the element of the whole universe, so that they gonna make the contrary way of being with the heat, cold, and great outpouring of the flood. So they like Hildegard still believes that the human beings, they are connected to the whole universe, and if human beings go bad, the world gonna go bad, and the nature gonna make a disaster because it is kind of codependent. They are all connected and they are or like independent, like very co-dependent. And regarding the woman's body more particularly, this is where my own interest lies. For Hildegard and for the medieval medicine and theology more broadly, the woman's body was understood as more open. The uterus, while partially closed here, I'm using this manuscript here, the woman's body was more open, and the uterus, while partially closed, is more porous than the male body. This porosity connects the woman more directly to the nature world and her connection to the cosmos. The menstrual blood, moreover, produces fruits in the womb, and menstruation is not merely sign of degeneration, but also generative. So Hildegard is bringing the scene of the transgression. So when the Adam's body became more poisonous because it is more hard, they had the semen which became poisonous. But the woman's body, they started to have a menstruation because they are designated to the reproductive duty. And it was already seen from the biblical description. So it was Eve who commit the sin first because she was soft and more airy because she was created from the flesh of Adam. And in this one, actually, this is not from her Hildegard's medicinal book, but it is from her visionary book, Quiviger's most well-known her manuscript. And in this creation scene, you're gonna see the like Adam lying down, and then from his side, actually Eve is created, which is kind of the cloud with the stars, and these stars actually resemble the stars in the firmament, and of course you're gonna see the evil or the snake actually reaching out to her because she's more soft and she's easy to be like attacked. And after this transgression, and because women now they have to menstruate and they have to deliver a baby, their bodies are more opened and divided, and even the head is divided and the skin is tender, so that it is more adaptable for women to carry out the duty of reproduction. And this openness also was required for the woman's health, not only in Hildegard, but also in general, the medieval medical book, because women can only retain their health by sending out the excrement or the residue of the humors through menstruation. So menstruation was performing a purgative function, and of course, it goes all the way back to the flow of desire entering Eve. And the woman's body is more open, and they're gonna be pouring out drops of her blood. And this is actually the woman's blood and humors are cleansed through menstruation. So menstruation is kind of the purgative process. So if woman does not have, I mean, infertile ages, if they cannot carry out this purgative process, they're gonna be sick and even they can die out of that too. So it is so important that the woman, they circulate the blood and send out or take in some of the necessary elements in it too. And this is, of course, Hildegard understood the menstruation in good relation to the reproduction. So women in fertile ages, they have to keep their effort to keep flowing this menstruation so that they can keep the vital force, which Hildegard used as the word viriditas. Viriditas actually, it's kind of hard to translate in English, but it brings the image of the tree because viriditas is related to the greenness, and she compares the woman's reproductive power to the tree's sap because as the tree draw all the needed elements through the roots and then it bring up the flowers and the leaves, the woman's body the same. The menstrual blood or the vital force has to keep and then they can be used for reproduction. So this viriditas has to be circulated and then boosted just like a tree. But so if women, they don't have the regular mens, they would be a problem both for their general health and reproductive health. So what should we do? According to Hildegard in her medical book, you can use, I mean, she suggested very different kinds of the treatment, but one of the treatment is using the nature, of course, and she believes that menstruation often is obstructed due to the coldness. So it is important that you get some kind of the herb or the treatment using the heat so that the woman's body again it is more open and then it can just bring out the menstrual blood out too. So in this passage in her book too, she explained that even the psychological reason, because it's kind of bringing the coldness to some young women, if they are extremely sad, maybe they're gonna be not having the menstruation because it is the blood constructed and dried up. But it should be opened just like the tree. So the happiness is needed. And sometimes if it does not need, maybe you might need different kinds of the treatment as well. So here another treatment for like obstructed menstruation. She is suggesting that a woman should take equal weight of anise and feverfew because those are known to have the heat, and the mullein, and then either or other, and heat them in water. So you kind of boiling them, and you have to use the water from the river flowing in the open air. So she is bringing some kind of the, or not only the nature, but surrounding of the nature too. And you have to place tiles in a fire, so making the sauna bath, and then with the herb and or like water. So she definitely believes that those kind of the, because nature already have the heat and the woman's body needs those heat. So definitely you can get the help from the nature achieving those heat that you needed. And this is not from Hildegard, but also Hildegard uses some of that. So it was kind of the typical understanding in the medieval medicine that because the woman's body, they are more opened, so they believe that they can use the fumigatory treatment to women. So if you burn the herb in this pot, and then you make the fume out of it, and if woman sit a perforated chair having this pot underneath, and then they believe that the fume gonna directly going into the woman's uterus and bringing the needed heat to the woman's body. So in numerous of cases, they suggest those fumigatory treatment. Hildegard does not mention about the perforated chair, but she definitely used the steam and the fume of this herb, especially mugwort, which you can find it popularly used still in East Asia. The conclusion. As Callas said, Hildegard emphasized the inner connections between the balance and the health of the natural world with the four humors and the elements of the human body and its susceptibility to disease. And this microcosmic body, the harmony and disharmony gonna create the whole scene. And also you're gonna find the elemental macrocosm in her book too. So Hildegard's ecology, health remains grounded in balance, harmony between the body and soul universe, but this harmony now understood as inseparable from restoration because of the Adam's transgression. The transgression degenerate not only human beings themselves, but to the whole world of the creation, making the physical, spiritual, and natural integrity mutually constitute. And human beings were understood as fallen and constitutionally imbalanced after transgression, yet always capable of recovering their original wholeness because they were once perfect, they were created by. And constant humoral restoration and purgation were therefore essential, not only the human beings, not only the woman, but also for a moment. And because sin and evil deeds reverberate through the cosmos, the health of the individual body and moral condition of the soul and the integrity of the natural world cannot be separated. Therefore, in Hildegard's ecology, the human beings are the participant in the divinely ordered, independent universe. Okay, so that's it for my talk, and thank you so much for listening to me.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Minji. As I said, we'll just roll straight over into François' intervention. So, François.
Okay, thank you. Let me share my screen. How do I do that now? Just a second. Mute. No, come on. Oh, I know what I can do. Maybe speaker. Yeah, okay. And now I should have an option to... yes, okay, I got it, don't worry. Here we are. Should start. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. It's, I guess you can hear me. So, a great pleasure and a privilege to be here. And without further ado, let me introduce you to that strange man, Bernard Palissy. So, among dwellers of Renaissance France, the Huguenot ceramist and natural philosopher Bernard Palissy stands out as an ideal subject to identify early modern awareness of present-day issues. His writings recommend him to modern concern in several ways, among which stands his understanding of nature anticipating aspect of the Gaia hypothesis, his awareness of what we now call the Anthropocene, his valuation of non-human intelligence, and consequently his proclaimed dissidence with the Renaissance idea of man with a capital M. Furthermore, Palissy's ideas produced lots of images, and therefore his work offers much scope for reflecting on the question of art and ecology. So after a brief outline of what we know of Palissy's life and work, I will survey his conception of the world and of sensory experience, as well as his understanding of animal wisdom and natural resources. And the concluding part will highlight aspects of the relevance of Palissy to 20th century art and thought. You can see on the top, you can see a few of the objects that are still attributed to Palissy. I'll come back to that in a second. So Bernard Palissy lived between 1510 and 1590. He was very much a jack of all trades, including carpentry, cabinet making, surveying and glass painting, and he eventually taught himself ceramics and achieved commercial success after about 16 years of painful trials and errors. He initially worked for the Duke of Montmorency, for whom he produced tableware and an artificial grotto, which he describes in his first publication. It's thanks to Montmorency that Catherine de Medici, the Queen Mother, took interest in his work. In 1564, he published the Recette Véritable, you can see the cover, the front page on the screen, which include various plans for gardens and grotto, and is a kind of founding application to Catherine de Medici. He was successful because in 1567 he entered the service of the Queen Mother, who set him up in a workshop in the Tuileries Garden at the Louvre. There with his sons he produced medals, plaquettes, rustic tablewares, and above all worked on an artificial grotto of which only a few literary traces and numerous fragments remain. He left Paris before the Saint Bartholomew massacre, August 1572, but he was back in 1575, delivering public lectures, which were later transcribed in 1580 in his Discours Admirable. In 1586, with the resumption of persecution against Protestants, he was jailed, released, and jailed again in the Bastille, where he died of a brutal treatment in 1590. After his death, Palissy's name fell into relative oblivion until the late 18th century. When his writings were rediscovered and reprinted, he became a national hero for his scientific ideas. He was more or less correct on fossils and was one of the first to understand how fertilizers actually work. And he was also famous for his autobiographical pages recounting his struggle to produce enamels, to the point that he even threw his furniture to feed his kiln to keep it at the right temperature. Now, this image of Palissy lasted well until the mid-20th century. It is summarized in the text accompanying the French government 1957 release of post stamps, surely the most official recognition one could ever get. And the commentary says, Bernard Palissy has remained a symbol of the obstinate researcher who sacrifices everything to the goal he sets for himself. After 16 years of uninterrupted efforts, he found the secret of Italian enamel. Thus, he could leave his mark on an abundant output of richly decorated enamels, very typical of the French Renaissance. Well, since the 1990s, however, scientific analysis has reduced Palissy's work to 7 authenticated pieces, while archival research has unearthed networks of workshops producing rustic ceramics, thus stripping Palissy 19th century avatar or image from much of his assumed production. Let me briefly show you some of his works before I pass to some of his ideas. As Palissy began mastering ceramics, he produced jasperized enamel in imitation of precious marble. Those that you see are only examples that could have been produced by Palissy. Anyway, his production must have been considerable, since in his long life he directed 3 workshops. Nevertheless, today, only 7 pieces and many fragments are authenticated on scientific as well as zoological ground. These include the 3 platters, the 3 ewers that you see, and the flask at the bottom. The rest are fragments excavated from the Tuileries Garden, first in the 1880s and more recently in the 1990s on the occasion of the construction of the Louvre Pyramid in the Cour Napoléon. What we found include all sorts of reject cast of lizard, snake, frog, leaves, cameos and medals, as well as larger pieces, such as terms for the grotto, these kind of figures around the windows of the grotto, like the kind of Hercules figure, a man full of shell, a man full of stone, and so on. Now, the world in movement. Let me tell you about the world according to Palissy, and his ideas are described in his two main publications, the Recette véritable and the Discours admirable. So, although Palissy wrote two books which could in part be characterized as natural philosophy, his focus is not really a disinterested philosophical quest of knowledge. Rather, in the context of the revival of agriculture in the 16th century in France, Palissy believed that his knowledge could be useful and lucrative. So he used the printed book to advertise his expertise as an agricultural consultant and as a garden designer. In fact, in the preface of the Discours admirable, he even offers his service to whoever wishes to hire him and specified that he can be contacted through his publisher. Palissy's main interest is in the earth, and I quote him, "I have no other book than the sky and the earth, which are known to all, and having read in this book, I consider earthly matters, since I did not study astrology to contemplate the sky." And indeed, Palissy had no Latin, so he had very limited access to astrology. This makes his idea on the earth somehow closer to modern view, since they are independent of notion of astrological influences and correspondence. His main awareness of the sky is that, like the sea, it is in perpetual movement, and so he concluded the earth also must be in perpetual movement. One aphorism, which is at the end of the Discours admirable, very much synthesized this point, and I quote, "In the same way as God ordered the surface of the earth to work itself to produce and germinate things necessary for man and beasts, it is evident that the interior and matrix of the earth does the same by producing diverse species of stone and metals and other necessary minerals." Palissy world is not only moving, but it is also sentient, not primarily in terms of a self-regulated organism, as in the later Gaia hypothesis, or as a balance of hot and cold, as in his contemporary Telesio, but it is more, at least the way he presents it, it's more in terms of its ability to experience pain. Indeed, nociception, perception of pain, features often in his writing. It extends to all living beings, tree, plants, fruits. He writes that, I quote, "It is certain that vegetal and insensitive natures suffer as they produce their fruit." And in another passage, he also deplored that the earth herself, should he say, experiences daily pain when brutalized and raped by the inadequate tools of incompetent laborers. Now, to understand Palissy's animate world, we must look at his elemental constitution. For while his contemporary conceive of humans and the universe according to the balance of its four constituent elements, water, air, fire, and earth, as in fact we've just heard earlier with Minji, Palissy distinguished five elements. The fifth element, the most important for him, is a generative water distinct from ordinary water. He writes, "I can therefore assure you that there are two types of water, one exhalative and the other essential, congelative and generative. And these are intermingled with each other in such a way that it is impossible to distinguish between them until one of the two is frozen." Flowing through geological layers, this primordial water fertilizes the seeds of gems and minerals which grow like fruits in the womb of the earth. This fifth water also permeates and solidifies vegetal, animal, and human remains. But it not only produces minerals and fossils, it petrifies as much as it enlivens, and it gives identity to things and being. Without this water, Palissy asserts several times, in fact, in his book, nothing could say I am. It is this water that germinates all trees and plants and sustain and maintain their formation until the end. So, constituting of the identity of things, this fifth element is therefore at the core of Palissy's own sensorium and identity. As fifth water is always mixed with common water, it is drunk regularly. It does promote bone growth, strength, and flexibility. The crystal clear transparency of generative water also affects vision, as Palissy writes. No, I think I just put the quotation. As Palissy writes about vision, crystalline water which causes sight has some affinity with generative water from which glasses, crystal and mirrors are made. Thus, while his contemporaries associated sight with fire, Palissy linked optical and bodily consciousness to the properties and action of this fifth water. In doing so, he connected sight, touch and taste via water, for water also irrigates the human tongue with its fertile moisture. Salt is the third pillar of Palissy's earthbound cosmology after water and earth. For him, salt has no specific color, smell or texture, which is why the human tongue is the best tool for detecting its presence. He writes, "Flavor is nothing other than the salt you taste, because God has given us the tongue to probe things that are useful for other parts of the body," and he thus concludes that the body cannot consume anything except those things from which the tongue can derive some flavor. Now, of salt, he had first-hand experience when he observed and drew the salt marshes of his province in the 1540s. However, the salt he discusses refer to nutrients in general rather than to our table salt. Palissy writes that there are many varieties of salt. For instance, La Recette Véritable opens on an essay on manure, in which he observed that when rainwater flows through a pile of manure, it carries away what he calls its salt, which, if collected, would improve soil fertility. And yet, there is no part of the earth that is not filled with some kind of salt that causes the generation of many things. Indeed, underground salts permeate everything that grows and determine the flavor and aroma of spices, fruits and vegetables, as well as their ability to preserve and reproduce. In the last part of the Discours Admirable, he further suggests the precedence of salt over climate to determine the flavor of fruits and vegetables growing in various countries. In several places, Palissy reports using the tip of his tongue to identify salt in lime, in the dust of certain mineral, and to observe that substances whose salt cannot be perceived and dissolved by the tongue are just unfit for consumption. As a result, it deduces the impossibility of using gold for therapeutic purpose, for according to him, it is impossible to consume gold because the tongue cannot taste it. If this were the case, sucking a gold coin would reduce its mass. In contrast to the philosophy of his time, which places man at the top of the hierarchy of earthly being, Palissy's world is one where wisdom is shared by all its dwellers. As he writes, God has ordered the earth to germinate and produce things necessary for human and animal, rather than for humans alone. Now, comparing Palissy... Oh, I think I got the wrong one here. Yeah, that's where I wanted to be, but it doesn't matter. Comparing Palissy with Montaigne on the subject of animal intelligence, on which they agree, clearly highlights the difference between Montaigne's methodical thinking, grounded in classical literature, and Palissy's self-acknowledged rustic language and scantier literary baggage. Thus, while Montaigne, in the first part of the Apologie de Raymond Sebon, assembled quotations from classical authors to illustrate animal deeds of loyalty, gratitude, magnanimity, clemency, repentance, and temperance, Palissy merely listed examples of animal and vegetal intelligence from dreams and observations spurred by his own enthusiasm for Psalm 104, celebrating nature as the work of an active God. Still, both Montaigne and Palissy use the same keywords, sapience and connaissance. Trees like, I'm speaking of Palissy now, trees like the walnut, although devoid of sight and hearing, have, I quote, received from God the connaissance of his weak nature, so that it acts accordingly. Orchard trees have also some connaissance, since they shelter their fruits with leaves in a fashion comparable to a mother protecting her child. Wheat, hop, and chestnut trees have received from God the sapience, that is, the knowledge and wisdom to close and protect their fruit with marvelous artistry. Animals too exercise intelligence. Palissy lists example: cunningness of foxes pretending to be dead to catch unsuspecting prey, cleverness of hedgehog carrying apples on their spike, or the alertness of rabbits. But one of the main practical applications of animal savoir-faire is their shelter. He's especially fascinated by shells, where, according to him, to Palissy, they achieve architectural results beyond the scope and ability of humans, to the point that, as he writes, never Solomon, with all his sapience, could have done the same. With his attention to the natural world, Palissy was one of the first to observe the effect of human intervention on nature, the so-called Anthropocene, or what is now called the Anthropocene. Two passages are relevant. The first, discussed in a recent article, concerns his observation that fossils record the existence of extinct species, while in his lifetime some species have almost disappeared as a result of excessive fishing or hunting. He also notes, as a result, that animals which no one would eat when he was young, like frogs and turtles, are now daily consumed, now that he's an old and an adult. These observations are presented, however, in a matter-of-fact manner, without any trace of indignation, anxiety, or call for regulation. But this passage contrasts strongly with the alarmist tone in which Palissy warns about deforestation, une malédiction et un malheur. He engages in a tirade highlighting the importance of woods for all the arts and the many financial benefits of sustainable exploitation of forestry, and to this end, he praised the wise investment of an Italian ruler who planted 100,000 trees. Hang on, I want to move. No, this way. Yeah, okay. Conceived to be immersed, Palissy's ceramic represents the life-giving aspect of water and salt. As he himself writes, tepid water produces frogs which attract all sorts of snakes and lizards to feed on them. And since these basins were filled with clear or scented water, enhancing their natural shine, they not only celebrated the power of the fifth element, but also catered for the sophisticated pleasure, defined in Aristotle Poetic, of seeing in representation what generates discomfort in reality, since to an early modern eye, the dwellers of the basins are also a sign that the water is alive as well as fetid and poisonous. Now, like most early modern artists and artisans, Palissy's work only existed because it was commissioned by his royal patrons, who incorporated it into the allegorical and Neoplatonic language of their court entertainments, a language carrier of ideas and ideology, sometimes very different from Palissy's own. So while Palissy wanted to celebrate the divine artistry of nature by taking the cast of its print rather than redesigning it, his work came to represent the lowest sublunar strata of the early modern Platonic universe in at least two theatrical sets. In the Ballet des Polonaises, 1573, which you can see here, his grotto installations are housing the allegory of the French province, who eventually stand up and sing. His work feature in another entertainment, the Ballet Comique de la Reine, 1581, but it features as the grotto of the god Pan, the rustic god par excellence, dweller of the deepest sublunar spheres and sexually hyperactive patron of agriculture, Palissy's core discipline. Now, the 19th century revival of Palissy inspired schools of imitators whose work defied the limits of virtuosity as well as, I believe, those of kitsch. Yet, beyond this mimetic movement, Palissy's ideas held plenty of relevance to 20th century art and thought in matter of gender and ecology. Although Palissy was a rather prudish man, his views on the earth as the matrix of the world are reflected in the shape of his basins, evocative of female genitalia, especially when reproduced and viewed in portrait format. In particular, the small frog placed at the top, the most rustic allusion to clitoral sensitivity, fits perfectly with the humor of the time, as can be gauged, for example, from Brantôme Dame Galante or Rabelais' Pantagruel. I have placed underneath some details of Judy Chicago, rather controversial in his days, dinner party, to highlight formal similarities in spite of different agenda, but certainly this aspect of earthly femininity was spotted by Catherine de Medici, Palissy's main patron, who promoted an iconography of feminine earthly fertility around her person in the many pageants that she organized. Closest to Palissy's ecological concern is Joseph Beuys, who probably did not know Palissy but seems quite literally to reincarnate many of his ideas in a modern art fashion. For instance, Beuys claimed that everyone is an artist rings in full sympathy with Palissy's own assumption that all creatures, including himself, are architects since they naturally build and decorate their shelter. Boyce's ecological activism, such as planting 7,000 oaks, echoes Palissy warning against deforestation. Boyce's double spade, which you can see on the top right, with its heart-shaped blade, expressed the need to penetrate the earth with heartfelt love, and symbolically address Palissy's indignation that the earth is daily bruised and raped by the spade of clumsy peasant. Further to the point is Boyce's performance explaining picture to a dead hare. The performance is quite obscure. A gold-plated, honey-smeared Boyce holds and manipulates a dead rabbit in front of pictures. But Boyce's explanation, however, is clear. If humans destroy nature, they destroy themselves because they are part of nature rather than distinct from it. So, to conclude, very much like Boyce, Palissy made art to change the world. As a committed Huguenot, he wanted to contribute to the Reformation by revealing his God through his representation and presentation of nature. His garden and grottos project are in fact studded with biblical quotation, some even made to grow on trees, and his potential clientele were, according to him, to his own estimate, the 4,000 aristocratic household, no, sorry, I just go this way, the 4,000 aristocratic households and gardens located along France's waterways. Palissy frequently asserted that his knowledge is exclusively based on experience rather than on books, yet he read and gathered much through translation and conversation with learned acquaintances. His knowledge is more like his ceramics, multiple substance, selected, ground, mixed, and melted by the power of his mind. So, for instance, the idea of universal animation, although articulated differently, is a core element of the Renaissance naturalism of Telesio, Cardano, Giordano Bruno, and Francesco Patrizzi. Palissy's earthly world is just one building block of Bruno's innumerable world, irrigated by the intelligence of the world soul. Palissy's idea on the formation of stone has some kinship with Avicenna, Kitab al-Shifa, known in the Middle Ages as decongélation and conglutination lapidum, which nevertheless attribute the formation of fossil soils and mountains to interaction between the elements and their quality, dry, wet, hot, and cold, rather than to the petrifying power of the fifth element. Palissy, another influence, placed much importance on water but did not discern a fifth element. He also thought that minerals grow in the earth, but unlike Palissy, believed in the influence of the star. Now, this fifth liquid element has been associated with the alchemical quintessence, except that Palissy's element is just the diametrical opposite of the quintessence, since the latter is obtained by fire, not water, and manifests itself through the sense of smell. At most, it developed from Palissy's view that alchemical belief are the diametrical opposite of reality. Palissy's official title of Ouvrier de Terre can be literally understood as made out of earth fertilized by salt and fifth water. In this respect, his immersive sense of nature connects him to modern philosophy and art, which have rejected dualism from Nietzsche to Judith Butler. Furthermore, Palissy's appreciation of non-human intelligence anticipates current scientific thought. But I think perhaps more significant, by asserting that nothing can say I am without the fifth liquid element, it just proposes and live in just another dimension than the one later consecrated by Descartes. I think, therefore I am. For Palissy, I can say I am, not because I think, but rather because I am active water. And indeed, he was mostly right, at least proportionally, because we are made of about 60% of water and the brain up to 77%. Thus, Palissy is now re-emerging as a precursor of modern ecological awareness, not so much as a matter of direct influence and of reconnection with a non-dualist approach to the world based on a respective understanding of nature as a living and sensing entity of which we are a part rather than external to its mechanics. And on this thought, I should thank you very much for your attention.